evening, everyone, and welcome to the final video of this flag review. In this one, we're going to be going over the last few tabs of the Final Fantasy Randomizer flags page to kind of give a rough overview of what they do, a little bit of strategic information about them, and maybe some insight onto like why a flag would be enabled or disabled and what you should be thinking about it. So without further ado, let's get started on Party. So the Party screen is relatively straightforward. Um, what it basically has is it's going to have an area that talks about what you can start with, and then it has an area about how things change throughout and how you can change your party in the seed. So this table has a few key parts. The top basically is just a select all selector, so it's just there for ease of use. The forced is going to make it so whether or not you can choose which of the classes you're going to get from that slot, or if it's going to be a forced one. So for example, this means it so that you will get one forced fighter or thief or a black belt, and you won't have a say. Versus this says that you can select a fighter, a thief, or a black belt, but you cannot select a mage for this slot. And finally, the last column, which is important, is the none. And this allows is if you have to take a class there, or you can select none, which is like no class for that slot. The slots 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Excuse me. And it might be a little bit uncommon for you to have the promoted classes here, but basically this will allow you to start with a promoted class, so keep that in mind. Yeah, so that's what this top section does. Moving into Party Draft, this is a totally different way to play, and this is going to give you a pool of drafts, including duplicates of a character. So it's not a pool of classes, it's a pool of it's not a pool of classes, it's a pool of characters that you can select from. So, for example, if there's 6, you might get 6 fighters. Very uncommon, but you might. But more commonly, you would get like, let's say 2 thieves, 2 white mages, a black mage, and a black belt. And then you'd have to pick your 4 slots from that pool. Normally, none is allowed. But yeah, and this ranges from 4 characters all the way up to 8. 6 is probably the most common, though. Moving into recruitment. So there's 2 different types of recruitment. There's tavern recruitment, and tavern recruitment allows you to recruit as many characters from a tavern, which is in the clinic, as you would like. But there's some restrictions on it sometimes. So for example, only replace nuns means that you cannot replace existing party members. You can only replace none slots. This is pretty popular if you make it so that you only start with a single fighter, for example, and then you have to go collect the rest of your party as you go. Something like this would be, you start with a single fighter and you have to collect the rest of the party as you go. But then you can't change it out. If you turn this off, though, you can change existing party members. They'll lose their spells, but they keep their levels, which is quite important. Disable reviving at taverns makes it so that you cannot bring characters back unless you have life 2, or like Phoenix items. This is a pretty radical difference and fairly uncommon, but if you want to play that way, it makes it so you have to switch your party out whenever someone dies, which definitely changes things up. This applies to both tavern recruitment and NPC, but basically says what classes you're able to recruit at those taverns. And yeah, moving over to NPC recruits, there's 2 different ways to do this. One is behind fiends, which is like this, where you can recruit the character after you select a fiend. And this is behind NPCs. Note that in order to recruit from an NPC, you have to have met the requirements to get the item from the NPC. That's very important, so keep that in mind. Force characters makes it so that you have to change your party up after you defeat a fiend in order to light the orb. And yeah, allow duplicates makes it so that there could be multiples of the same class in the NPC pool. So it doesn't, if you pick 12, of course there's going to be duplicates. But if you allow duplicates, there might be 5 black mages before you see a single black belt, for example. It's most common to have 6, but allow duplicates is relatively common. And then finally, promoted classes will add promoted classes to the pool. It'll select based off of these classes down here still, but it will allow there to be promoted ones. And yeah, that's pretty much Party. Moving into classes. So there's a couple different things going on here. We'll start with the most common ones, which are class balance and class blurring. So class balance, there's a couple different things. So the black belt as a class in general got buffed quite significantly compared to the vanilla game. The reason for this is because gaining bonus EXP, needing less EXP to get a level, which is the same thing, having better spike tiles available earlier to grind on, and having less forced encounters, so grinding on a stationary grind on a spike tile is better, all are buffs to black belts. And because of that, the crit rate that it got in the vanilla game was exceedingly powerful, to the point of like a 32 black belt is better than a fighter with basically any set of armor or any set of armor, any weapon, even like super buffed Masas. So halving the black belt crit rate is on quite frequently to balance the class out. The ninja, on the other hand, is often quite weak, and there's two buffs here for the ninja. So double thief and ninja hit percent growth. This is going to make it more of an offensive powerhouse. It's going to mean it gets its extra hits earlier, which is quite important. And better thief and ninja agility. This is going to make it so the thief is evasive to melee attacks. It doesn't prevent the thief from getting hit by spells. So, nuke and things like that are still a big problem for the thief with the relatively low HP pool. But it does make it so that it handles melee attacks a lot better. It also increases your first strike chance and decreases your chances of getting ambushed only if the thief is in the first slot, or the ninja. Raising hit percent cap makes it so that you can get an extra hit at max level. And MDev growth. So there's three different options for this. There's vanilla, invert all, and black belt, master plus 3+4. So something for vanilla is important to recognize is that mages actually have bad MDev growth. Melee classes have higher ones. The black belt has a MDev growth of 4, and the master has an MDev growth of +1, which is quite odd. It means that the black belt, which is the unpromoted master, gets better magic defense than the promoted black belt, the master. So you generally want to promote as late as possible. With the black belt, which is a little bit unintuitive. So what the first one does is it just changes so the black belt gets +3 and the master gets +4. So just like all the other classes, you're going to want to promote the black belt as soon as possible. Inverted, on the other hand, has a little bit of a different goal. It makes it so that your mages have better magic defense than your melee classes, which is more or less intuitive. It's what you would expect. These are actually relatively uncommon to be turned on, but it does make the game behave differently. So just keep that all in mind. Moving on to class blurring. So class blurring, what this does is just like gear and items, there's equipment blurring. This is going to buff or nerf classes randomly, giving them bonuses like extra hit percentage or extra HP, or giving them malices like less spells per level, or less HP or less HP growth, or less luck or less luck growth. There's a few really important bonuses. Luck is really important. Hit percent can be really good. Strength can be really good. HP can be really good. But the big ones are spellcasting bonuses, which is basically the ability to cast white or black magic, like you were a thief, or sorry, a ninja, or a knight, or a white mage, or a black mage, or a red mage. Those can be huge bonuses. So if those are too strong for you, which they are for me personally most of the time, you can exclude spellcasting bonuses. The reason I like this flag is because it makes it so that your black mages or your red mages, they are not really they have a purpose still. If you have a fighter who has black magic, why would you take a black mage? A fighter is just going to be better in every way. Except for maybe being able to cast promoted black magic, but that's so rare anyways. So this is going to exclude spellcasting bonuses from the pool. Chaos mode is totally different. What Chaos mode is Chaos mode totally changes every single class, gives them a ranking of stats, gives them hit percent, MDev growth, HP growth, gives them magic, weapons, so on and so forth. Now, while this definitely changes the classes entirely, and fighters are no longer really fighters, they're generic class A versus, or not generic, they're custom class A versus custom class B versus custom class C. They're just using the same sprites. It does it has the effect normally of making there one or two really strong classes, and then you're just going to take either 4 of one class or 3 of one class and 1 of another, or maybe 2 of each of the good ones. So keep that in mind, but it is definitely an interesting way to play. Moving on to promotion. So random classes at class change. What this is going to do is it's going to randomly select classes for your thing. So for example, a fighter might turn into a ninja, and a thief might turn into a black wizard, and so on and so forth. If you're going to turn this on, I definitely suggest turning on spoiler promotions as well, so that way you can plan ahead. You can see here that this fighter is going to become a ninja, and I think that's pretty important. But if you don't, so on and so forth, and then you're kind of in chaos mode. Include base classes means that your fighter can become a black mage, not even a black wizard, which is just a different way of playing. But these are all fairly uncommon. And finally, the last thing on this page, magic charges. This is going to change the max amount of MP that a class can gain. It's commonly set to something like this. The knights and the red mages both benefited greatly from having the magic that they can learn reduced or shuffled. So for example, in the vanilla game, the red mage can't learn nuke, they can't learn cure 4, they can't learn life 2, but because the spells, what level they appear at, has been shuffled, all of a sudden the red mage becomes a lot more powerful because it gets access to spells that it could never learn in the vanilla game. So to counterbalance that, you can decrease their max magic charges. You can also decrease max magic charges in general if you want to make it so that people are more likely to pick up ethers and dry ethers and X ethers, which are something that are in this next tab. So that's just an interesting thing you can do. Commonly, I think this would be the most common way to set it up. Small nerfs to the red mage and the knight. do what you want. And finally, knights and ninjas gain charges in all levels. So what this does, in the vanilla game, after you've promoted, you start gaining levels every odd level. So for example, if your knight up to a maximum of 4 normally. So in the vanilla game, if your fighter promotes to a knight at level 1, well then you're going to gain your first charge at level 15. That's the earliest level knight can start gaining charges, and you're going to gain one every odd level. So 15, 17, 19, 21 is when you'll max out. However, if you promote later, for example, let's say you promote at level 16, well, you'll skip the 15 one entirely. You're not going to start at 1 charge. You're going to start at 0, and then you're getting your first charge at 17, then 19, then 21, then 23. Or if you start at 17, if you promote at 17, then it's going to be 19, 21, 23, 25, so on and so forth. What this one does is makes it so you gain at every level instead of every odd level. So if your knight promoted at, let's say that example of 16, you get it at 17, 18, 19, and 20, which means that when you promote becomes a little bit less important and allows you to gain access to your spell charges faster. Okay, and that's classes. Moving on to gears and items. Okay, so gears and items, there's a couple key sections here. The most common ones that are on are these ones down here, as well as consumable items, and then maybe some starting equipment, but we'll touch on all of them. So starting equipment, very straightforward. It's going to give you gear in your initial inventory before you even do anything. These are all actual items. These are random like sets of gear. These ones down here, what these do is they actually change the properties of these random starting ones. So for example, no legendary duplicates, make sure that you can't get multiples of the same legendary item. And then remove items from treasure chest removes it from the rest of the game. So for example, with the Masa, it will remove the Masa that you would find in chests. Instead, you only get the one that you start with. Now, this is interesting, but these flags aren't game changers. They'll definitely pay attention to what's in your starting inventory. Moving into equipment blessings. So these have been around for a while, but basically what these flags do is they change the stats on your weapons or your armor. So blessed weapons, what it's going to do is it's going to increase your damage by 2 or decrease your damage by 2 if it's negative, and then it's going to increase your hit by 3%, which is the equivalent of 1 fighter level, by the way, or and increase or decrease your crit by 1.5%, or crit rate of 3, which is a percentage point of 1.5%. Now, the reason I said the hit is 1 fighter level is because let's talk about like the defense sword, for example. It normally gets its bonus hit, or the X-Cal. The X-Cal gets its hit breakpoint at 29, but if it's an X-Cal plus 1 for the fighter, it's going to get it at 28 instead, level 28, and if it's a plus 2, 27. If it's minus, it's going to go the other direction. So minus 1 is going to be 30, minus 2 is going to be 31, and so on and so forth. So it's important to recognize that these hit breakpoints change with the blurses because of the change in hit percentage here. Damage, pretty straightforward. This makes it so the Masa doesn't get blessed or cursed. And armor. Okay. Armor, the big one is it changes the absorb. It changes the absorb, or defense of the armor, by 1 for all gear except for chest armor, which changes by 2. So, for example, not much to say. The key point here is that the bracelets are roughly 10 absorb apart. So, roughly. If it's plus 5 difference, then you should usually wear the lower tier bracelet instead of the upper tier. So, for example, if you have a gold bracelet minus 3 and a silver bracelet plus 3, the silver bracelet is actually stronger than the gold bracelet, so you should wear it instead. So do keep that in mind. Okay, moving into balance. So in the vanilla game, like the vanilla game, there was a bug that made the crit rate of weapons be based off of their index instead of being based off the crit rate they were supposed to have. And this made, in general, all weapons in the game have a higher crit rate than what was intended. However, when we fix this bug, it makes the weapons tend to crit a little bit too low, and it makes high absorb enemies very problematic. So this basically doubles the crit rate, which doubles the crit percentage of all the weapons in the game. And it really helps anemic crit weapons like the X-Cal be able to get through some very high absorb enemies a lot easier. Same thing with weapon, elemental, and type bonuses. This wasn't bugged. It was just set to a very low value of 4, which is tiny. 4 extra damage. That's basically nothing. So what this does is it increases it to 10 by default, but you can even go even higher, like 30, which is insane. And this makes it so that things that like have lightning element or prey on wear type, it's going to make them do 30 extra damage to those enemies per hit, which is huge. So this is becoming increasingly popular, so that like choosing weapons really matters. It's a big buff to the X-Cal because the X-Cal preys on all elements, one of the only minis in the game who doesn't have any is Chaos. So X-Cal is still not better against Chaos, but it's going to be better against almost everything else. Moving on to consumable items. So starting inventory, pretty common. One of the most common things is just tents, but this is basically just going to start you with some items in your inventory. You can see what exactly you're going to start with over here. Treasure stacks. This makes it so that when you find gear on NPCs or in chests, you're going to get more than one, especially for tents and heals. This makes a big difference. Generous 20 heals for one chest. That can be really, really nice. Consumable chests. This increases the amount of consumable chests that are in the game and decreases the amount of gold, rewards, and gear. Um, Not super common, but yeah, that's what it does. Not much else to say. House full HP restoration. In the vanilla game, houses only restore 120 HP, sorry. But this makes it so they recover all of their HP. This is almost always checked, but if you want to turn it off, go ahead. Finally, there's turn shelters into ethers, and what this does is completely replaces tents, cabins, and houses with ethers, dry ethers, and X ethers. So tents, cabins, and houses in the vanilla game, they work on the overworld. But if you're playing something like Deep Dungeon or no overworld, they're pretty useless. So changing them into ethers, dry ethers, and X ethers makes a lot of sense, because what ethers, dry ethers, and X ethers do is they restore your MP to a character. So ethers restore level 1 charge of level 1 and 2 magic. Dry ethers restore 1 charge of level 1, 2, 3, 4 magic, and X ethers restore 1 charge of 1 through 8. So if you use one of each of them, let's follow. The first one will give you 1 charge level 1 and 2. The second one will give you 1 of 1 through 4, so you'll have 2 charges of 1 and 2, and 2 charges of 3 and 4. And the third one will give you 1 of all of them. So you'll have 3 charges of level 1, 2 charges of 1 through 4, or sorry, 2 charges of 3 and 4, and 1 charge of 5 through 8. And that's what this flag does. Okay, moving on to new consumables. So this enables some brand new items that were not even in the original game. So Full Cure, Phoenix, Smoke, and Blast. They do what they say right here. So Full Cure, raise a dead light warrior, including in battle, automatically run from a battle, or cast Fire 3. Yeah, how you get them changes. You can put them in your inventory, starting, and then you can't find them anywhere else. Or you can also put them into chests, like so. Or you can put them into normal shops or legendary shops. Chest stacks works exactly the same as in treasure chest stacks. This just increases the amount that you get when you open one of the following items. And that's what new consumables do. Moving into spellcasting gear. The first one I'm going to touch on here is actually the second one, which is item magic. What this does is this shuffles the spells that are on your caster gear. So for example, instead of having Zeus Gauntlet, you could have an Arab Gauntlet, and a Nuke Helm instead of a Heal Helm, and a Lit 3 Gauntlet instead of the Power Gauntlet, and a Brack instead of the Defense Sword. This is often paired with Balance Shuffle to make sure that Balance Shuffle, what it does is it decreases the variance in the spells that you can get, so you can't get like a Nuke Helm that trivializes the seed. Yeah, that's what those two do. Insert ruse items. Make sure there's at least one ruse staff in the game. And this is good for high difficulty flag sets with a lot of randomization, because it guarantees that you're going to be able to cast ruse on yourself. And this is a good way to make sure that you can get through most bosses. So ruse casts 2 stacks of evasion on self, and it only casts on one character, which is good, because basically it makes it so that if your knight has life, for example, you can cast on itself 3 times, get up to max evade, which is 6 stacks of evasion, and then you only get hit by crits. So that's pretty nice. All weapons cast spells. What this does is it makes it so that every single weapon in the game will have a spell associated with it. And Balance Spells does the same thing as before. It decreases the variance on the spells that you can get. And finally, no item magic makes it so that even your Zeus Gauntlet, well, it still will be called the Zeus, will not be able to cast Lit 2. Finally, weapon randomization. This is a brand new thing, well, not brand new, but relatively new thing that basically changes how weapons work entirely. You're going to have a type and a modifier. So you'll have a steel knife, which a fighter can equip, or a silver sword, which fighters, thieves, and red mages can equip. The quality level is going to change their stats, and you can tell based off this how good they are. There's also going to be certain ones that have like types, elemental, chroma, and there's also still going to be legendary weapons in the game. So that's what this is going to do. And it changes the game quite a bit, but make sure you turn on the adjustment, which is chest information or identify things, so that way you can tell what they do. Common weapons have powers, make some things behave more like swords, where they're not super strong, but they can have bonuses against weapon types or monster types or elemental weaknesses. And name for casting and quality only. So it doesn't name them for their bonuses versus monster types or elemental weaknesses, only quality or spell casting. So here, for example, you can see this is a longsword, but it has the poison element. Okay, that is equipment and items. And finally, we have the adjustment one. So this has conveniences, bug fixes, RNG, and changes how saving works. So bug fixes I'll just go over very quickly, but basically the vanilla FFR game is horribly broken. This fixes the bugs that were in the vanilla game. So House MP restoration. In the vanilla game, the MP recovers after it saves the game, which means that if you restart or you die, you're going to have no MP again, which is very, very annoying. So it fixes that. If you want houses to restore full HP, keep in mind that is actually in gear and items. That's house full HP restoration, which isn't a bug fix. That's just a buff to houses. Weapon stats. This fixes how elemental and type bonuses in weapons work. I think it also fixes the crit rate percentage on them, so that it's not equal to their index. Chance to run. This fixes so the chance to run is not based on all this other random garbage. This is almost always on. All of these are almost always on. Spell fixes. This makes it so that lock and temper actually work. If you want to nerf lock, don't do it here. Do it on, is it here? The lock. Here, lock. Do it on this one instead. So lock and lock 2, nerf it instead of just making it so that it never does anything. Enemy status attacks. This makes it so that if the first one hits, not all the other attacks always can apply the status effects, even if they miss. This makes it so that each attack that hits can apply the status effect, which is much better. This fixes it so that Black Belt and Master Absorb calculation works the way it's supposed to. And I'm not even going to say what it works in vanilla. The way it's supposed to work is that if you are wearing armor, it's equal to the absorb of the armor. If you're not wearing armor, it's equal to the level of the Black Belt or Master. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's what this does. Enemy elemental resistances. This fixes a bug where Xfer and other spells that affect elemental resistances don't work. Pretty straightforward. Enemy spells targeting allies. This makes it so that it targets both the caster and the rest of the enemies instead of just the other enemies. So Invis 2 would not hit the caster, for example, which is obviously a bug. And finally, improved turn order randomization does exactly what it says. RNG tables. This randomizes the RNG table. And the key one here is that it changes encounter manipulation. So if this was not on, you could just use the encounter table from the vanilla game and just memorize it and not have to learn the encounter manipulation table. But with this on, you have to learn it every seed. Fix missing battle RNG entry. What this does is this makes it so that the missing battle entry, which is 0x95, is added and the second 00 is removed. The actual effect of this is it makes it so that the 3 in 256 chance becomes a 2 in 256 chance instead. So it decreases the odds of very low likelihood things to happen, like getting zapped through a ribbon or brack through a ribbon or so on and so forth. This is not on very often, but I don't know why. I think it should be on a little bit more frequently. Okay, saving. These are pretty big deals if they're on, so really pay attention. They're not usually on, but they do change things substantially. So disable tent cabin house saving on the overworld. This does two things. The big one is that it makes dungeon dives more annoying, because if you die in them, you have to go all the way back to the town. But the other thing, which is the reason why people turn it on, is it also stops you from encounter manipulating on the overworld. So if you're against encounter manipulation, sure, turn this on, but I would highly recommend against it. Disable in-saving, also very recommend against it, but if you don't want people to be able to save in towns and only save on the overworld, you can turn this on. If you turn them both on, people can't save, which is miserable unless you turn on save what game when game over, in which case when you die, you save once you get back to the continue screen. Do not press restart. Do not press reset. Let the game go back to the title screen or the continue screen. And then the game will save and you'll go back not to the location you died, but you'll go back to the beginning of the dungeon, but you'll keep your levels and your gear. There's a strategic implication of this, because if you die in Ice Cave, for example, you can get out faster sometimes than if you had to walk out, so keep that in mind. Dragon Warrior mode not only saves the game when you game over, but it also sends you all the ways back to Canaria. It brings your ship and floater with you, or airship with you if you have them, but it also halves your gold. So welcome to Dragon Warrior. This is very infrequently on. It can be quite annoying. Maybe if you start with the floater though. And finally, conveniences. So no party shuffle. This prevents the game from shuffling your party when characters die or when they get status ailments. Keep this on. It's very, very annoying otherwise. Speed hacks makes everything go faster. Keep this on. It's almost always on. Quick minimap load. This makes the minimap load faster. It's not usually on because people don't usually use the minimap, but you absolutely can turn it on, no problem. Faster ship, a relatively new flag. This makes this ship into what we call the speedboat, and it makes it almost as fast. I think it's as fast as the airship actually. This changes balance a little bit. It makes the difference between having the airship and not quite a bit smaller, but it does improve the gameplay experience. And I think it's becoming more and more popular as time goes on. Identify treasures. This makes it so that instead of saying can't hold anymore, it says can't hold item name. And that's really important because it will let you find like, oh, this is a ribbon. I should probably drop some gear for this. This is basically always on. Enable dash makes you walk twice as fast. And you can hold B in order to walk instead. So if you're scared about slipping on a banana peel in Ice Cave, hold B, and then you don't go quite so fast. Buy quantity. This is almost always on these days, but basically instead of buying one at a time, you can now buy up to 99 at a time. Very, very handy. Change unrunnable one run to wait. So in the vanilla game, you can't actually tell when enemies are unrunnable. It just says run, and you can just keep trying, and it will never let you run. So this changes enemies that are unrunnable to wait, so you know that you have to go nuke those suckers. Critical hit count display. Usually it will say crit in the vanilla game, but now it will say you crit twice, which is quite a bit more helpful because it will let you judge, why you're doing damage, whether it's because of crits or not. This is basically always on. All of these are basically always on. This is always on, 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 this is always on. Faster ship, quick mini map load, off a little bit more frequently. Battle magic menu wraparound. This lets you go press up to go from level 1 to level 8, which speeds up menuing in battle instead of pressing down, 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 down. Very convenient, not really much reason to turn it off. NPC guillotine. This lets you remove enemies from the map by talking to them that only have one line or one text box in the vanilla game, which critically means bats in Earth Cave and Waterfall. So you can talk to them, they go away, poof, very handy. Auto sort inventory. This changes how the item menu is displayed by default and moves consumables above key items. Critically, this moves heal pots to slot 1, which means that you can heal pot much faster without having to menu around. Older players tend to dislike this because it decreases their execution advantage, but this should basically always be on. And if you want to turn it off, you can always renounce autosort in the quality of life settings. I personally do not because why? Yeah, shop information. This makes it so that you can tell when a character can learn a level or learn a spell or equip some gear because they will enter their victory pose, as you can see here. It also gives you information about what that spell does. Very helpful. You can press select to show a description, by the way. It doesn't just show up by default because this is usually the buy box. So pressing select will show the description. Chest information gives you the same information, obviously not equip information, but gives you the same information on when you open a box. If you don't like this, I personally don't because I can't see the name of the gear as easily, you can disable it down here by renouncing chest information, which I personally do. But I think for newer players, this flag is great. And finally, all incentive chest items fanfare. So what this does is this makes it so that all incentive items that you open, including non-key items, like the ribbon, for example, will give you a fanfare. And this is absolutely critical if you have something like this, where you have 2 loose items, but if you find a ribbon, you don't know if it's the incentive ribbon or the non-incentive ribbon. Well, this will make it so that you still get an incentive chest fanfare when you find the incentive ribbon, versus the other ribbon will just say you got a ribbon. So this is very, very much recommended when you have loose items. If you don't have loose items, not so necessary, though it can still be helpful for new players to recognize this. New players do keep in mind that if you're so used to having this on that it might be you might have been associating it with incentive chests, but this doesn't always have to be on. And yeah, that is the Final Fantasy Randomizer flags. I hope you enjoyed and had a chance to learn some stuff about these. If you have any questions, of course, check out our Discord, the New Player Duck Pond channel is great to ask any questions. If you're going to be making some flag sets, I suggest you start off presets. These are designed for a reason and they're a really good way, and then you can make some small tweaks in these various tabs. If you don't know what you want to do, just ask a veteran player or another beginner to see what have they played and had fun with. And finally, don't be afraid to try these flags out and just reset if you realize, oh, my shop prices were way too high, my shop item was too expensive, or oh, this encounter rate's miserable, or oh, this encounter rate's too low, or oh, this class is overpowered. It takes a lot of tweaking to find the right flags, the way that you want to play, and we have so many options that there's always something to tweak. And with that, I hope you have a great night and good luck in the Duckling Bootcamp and the Duck Derby.